Hello everyone, my name is Samuel Mackey, and I will be talking about the Signal Corps during the Korean War. Now, while this branch doesn't seem to really be talked about, or at least not many people really think about it when it comes to the Army and whatnot, its prominence should at least be addressed. But before that, let's get to the Korean War. The Korean War started June 25th, 1950 and ended July 27th, 1953. It had started when North Korea poured across the 38th parallel, which was the boundary between the Soviet-backed Democratic People's Republic of Korea to the north and a pro-Western Republic of Korea to the south. Now, the U.S. getting involved was really due to the fact that the U.S. thought that this was more of a war against international communism, which is the opposite of the ideology that the U.S. goes by. Now, let's get to the Signal Corps. The Signal Corps was established in March 1863 and is still around today. The purpose of the Signal Corps is to supply information systems and worldwide networks for the Army, in simpler terms, communications. This is integral to the success of the U.S. Army, and I feel that the Signal Corps actually benefited the most from the Korean War, despite their struggle that they had to deal with during the Korean War. Allow me to explain. After World War II, the Signal Corps was ordered to dismantle their global military communication system, and there were plenty of signal officers, who felt that this policy was short-sighted, and there wasn't really any theory as to why they chose to dismantle it. But this did come back to bite. How, you may ask? Well, here's how. So, when the U.S. got involved in the Korean War, any communication to the U.S. from diplomatic outposts in Korea were reduced to a single telephone line that did not work often. Another con to this was that it was guaranteed that whatever was being said by someone in Asia was not well heard in Washington. So there really wasn't much communication that was able to be heard from anybody when it was something necessary, which in this case, every single thing had to be broadcasted, and if not, there would be a problem. So, let's go to the Signal Corps while they're in Korea. The Signal Corps has struggled with little equipment that they had because they did not know they would need such a vast quantity. This equipment was also really faulty. Nothing was working well, and things were rather old. So, then let's move over to the people. The people who were qualified to be in the Signal Corps, learning everything that they had already learned, had to relearn everything. So whatever they learned prior was invalidated because they had to adapt to this new situation that they were in for the sake of the war. And also, this was to help out for the newbies as well, because the new people were not able to just easily learn the old stuff. But it would have been pointless for them to learn the old stuff, considering the fact that there were new things to be learned. So, and it is also said from this point that this unexpected invasion had caught the military and Signal Corps with no planned personnel, program, or training facilities. So not only was it harder to get more qualified people to learn, but then you have the people who had to relearn, therefore not being available personnel for the sake of this war. Eventually, what was done to try and combat this was that wires were taken out across the terrain, and the terrain wasn't exactly flat, so the wires would sometimes get caught on things. The wires would sometimes be cut by civilians or be taken down by civilians. So there were plenty of things that were in the way of the troopers being able to get any message out. There were signal troopers who also had moved in lockstep with combat troopers, to the point of where they even moved into the trenches with them. There were signal troopers that would go into the trenches to carry out messages. My granddad had actually talked about his experience being a signal trooper in the trench, and he said it's actually the reason why he's afraid of snakes. Funny enough. But that's all he really ever talked about concerning the war for himself, at least. They didn't really ask him much questions. Moving on. Now, this is where things really started to turn up for the Signal Corps. Eventually, they settled with a VHF and a microwave radio systems, which worked out extremely well, to the point of where this was also utilized during the Vietnam War. It was well known that the VHF and microwave radio were easy to deploy, easy to maintain, and had provided tons of communication circuits. There was a certain point in the Korean War as well where the Signal Corps got their wings back. They were able to start utilizing planes to carry out messages, if need be, and they started to reinvent their tactics. What does this mean? Well, they started to adapt to the war in certain ways. The reason was that the warfare had changed entirely from the World War II era. So it is said that the Signal Corps incorporated traditional tactics of warfare, with real-time capabilities into their combined forces strategies. And by the end of the war, they had left their past behind. The problem was they had entered this war with one foot in the past and tried to operate by the way they used to operate, when this war called for something different. But the war changed them to the point of where now they're able to plant themselves firmly in the 20th century. Moving on. So, in conclusion, something to consider is how each war changed not only our country but troops for the better. You can always look at it from the worst, but there's always going to be some type of benefit that came to somebody. Seeing that the Signal Corps acquired something beneficial, despite the struggle that they had to go through, it is evident that their change seemed to be the most impactful, as now the Signal Corps operates at a better efficiency than it did prior to the Korean War. And it's also in theory that if the Signal Corps had actually been at its efficiency that it was at before, or they had operated at peak efficiency, maybe even if the global military communication system was down, it's in theory that a war might not have been even necessary. But obviously, history has shown that things are different. Thank you for listening and have a great day.